The night I decided to shut everything down, the building hummed like a ship at idle. The boardroom glass reflected a version of me I barely recognized. Suit jacket on the chair, tie coiled in a loose spiral, a coffee ring the size of a silver dollar fossilized near my elbow. Outside, rain stitched diagonal lines across the city. Inside, two phones vibrated in counter-rhythm. In the hallway, our general counsel, Grace, waited with a folder and the kind of held breath lawyers learn in their first month. The decision was simple to say and terrible to live. Ground the fleet, freeze every cold chain shipment, take the hit before the hit takes us. A refrigerated rig in West Texas had sent a string of readings that did not make sense. Temperature curves with a heartbeat, as if the cargo were alive and anxious. Vaccines do not pace the floor. People do. I pressed my thumb into the table until the wood bit me back and said, softly so no one would mistake it for bravado, "Do it." Grace nodded. In the dark window, the city headlights looked like code running away from me. I did not know it yet, but the next hours would turn into years. This is how those years began. I grew up in a small house that smelled like laundry steam and warm corn tortillas on Saturday nights. My mother, Elena, counted tips on the kitchen table with lips moving, not from greed but from respect, like each dollar carried a story she had promised to remember. My father, Dean, fixed vending machines and came home with pockets that rattled. The first time I understood profit, I was a kid selling ice-cold sodas from an igloo cooler during Little League games. The heat that day felt like a hand pressing the back of my neck. I charged a quarter more than the snack shack and said it was for the walk. People laughed and paid. When the cooler was empty, I took the crumpled bills to Coach Ramirez and asked if I could rent the shade under the bleachers next week. He squinted at me like I was a stray idea that might become a plan. In high school, I learned two languages that matter in America: English and the way money moves. I stocked shelves at a grocery store, noticing the rhythm of the scanner beeps and the quiet panic when the bread aisle ran low. Manager Bennett explained shrink to me, how product that disappears does not vanish, it haunts the margins. We stood in the back near the humming compressors, and she tapped the metal housing with her pen. Cold costs, she said. Every minute counts. I can still hear that compressor, a steady animal breathing behind the walls. Years later, I would tell a room of analysts a simple fact. What people call the supply chain is really a chain of promises, and every broken link is a broken promise to someone who will not forget. At college, I scraped by with a roommate named Marcus who soldered circuits in the kitchen like it was a normal place to inhale rosin fumes. He taught me that solder smoke smells faintly of pine because the flux is derived from sap. That tiny fact came with a bigger lesson. Everything has a reason if you stand close enough without flinching. We built cheap sensor kits on the table. We also ate on, burned pancakes, and argued about whether ambition is a form of hunger or a form of thirst. I answered both. He laughed and said, "Then drink water and keep going." My first company fit in a backpack and lived on borrowed power outlets. I called it Harbolite because I liked the idea of something steady you could steer toward without asking permission. The pitch was ugly but honest. Stick our sensors in refrigerated trailers and tell people what is going on in there, minute by minute, mile by mile. Drivers would not have to guess. Pharmacists would not have to pray. The early devices looked like toys and failed like toddlers, loud and often. A woman named Maya was our first operations hire. She wore her hair up with a pencil and filed paperwork with the speed of a card dealer. She kept a jar of jelly beans on her desk that I ate without asking. "You owe me rent," she said. "Pay in wins." Our first win was small enough to carry in one hand. A regional grocer in Arizona let us ride along on a run of strawberries. The driver, Carlos, had a jaw like a cliff and a calm that made the word veteran come to mind. I sat on the passenger seat balancing a laptop, cables snaking across my knees. The desert looked like the ocean had been paused mid-wave and turned to sand. At a truck stop, Carlos told me a thing I have since repeated in boardrooms where no one eats the muffins. "Strawberries are like gossip," he said. "They hate sunlight and travel fast." Another factoid for your pocket. Strawberries lose a surprising amount of fragrance within a day after harvest, which is why the best ones smell like the ones your grandmother bought before smartphones were a thing. Our data showed a tiny temperature drift near the back doors. Not enough to ruin, enough to dent. The grocer used the report to rearrange pallets and saved a few $1,000s the next month. I slept on the office floor like a saint and woke with lint on my face. There were girlfriends, and there were girls who were friends, and I treated those categories like guardrails because I had seen what happens when you drive without them. Still, life is not a spreadsheet. One night a woman named Sophie sat beside me at a coffee shop that used Edison bulbs and hand-lettered menus. She had a laugh that arrived one beat late, as if she let the room try the joke before she did. She worked in public health and read policy papers the way other people read mysteries. She asked me why cold medicine costs less than a cup of coffee some mornings and triple that when a flu spike hits. I said markets are mood swings with bank accounts, then apologized for sounding clever. She shook her head. No, that is true and lazy, she said. The rest is logistics and ethics. We saw each other for a season, and then life, which is a better editor than any person, cut that chapter with kindness. The first crisis did not look like a crisis. It looked like growth. A national pharmacy chain gave us a trial across 3 states. Our team expanded like new shoes that pinch. New faces, new Slack channels, new rules. I learned that leadership is not the person with the clearest idea. It is the person who can translate that idea into something exhausted people can carry. We hired a head of sales named Trevor who wore suits that fit like decisions and shook hands like a contract. We also hired Julia, a product manager who could listen until your point turned into a drawing in her notebook. On a Friday night that smelled like takeout and printer toner, we found a pattern we did not want to see. Our sensor firmware was dropping packets when the trailer crossed into rural dead zones. Data gaps. Not long ones, painful ones. Seconds that felt like lies. Edge caching. Marcus said on the phone, thumping his desk somewhere across town. Queue on device. Reconcile when you get air. Yes, but the hot zone is where the cold counts. We pushed a patch and held our breath. 2 months later, an investor named Olivia stood in our kitchen office and rinsed a coffee mug like she belonged there. I like boring miracles, she said. Yours is one. She had a way of saying praise like a line item. I told her my father used to collect spare change in a jar labeled rain with a piece of blue tape. She smiled. You are asking for a storm fund. We closed the round. The money hit, and I felt a physical shift, like the elevator had moved without the doors opening. Here is a fact that sounds like folklore and is not. The standardized steel shipping container did more to lower the cost of goods worldwide than many treaties, in part because it replaced dockside theft, breakage, and delay with sameness, and sameness is a kind of truth machines prefer. I taped a picture of a container shipped to my monitor to remind myself that beauty can be practical. We made our first acquisition with a handshake on a sidewalk. A small team in Ohio had built routing software that treated detours like puzzles instead of annoyances. The founder, a gentle man named Sam with a beard that tried to hide his shyness, asked for a fair price and a promise to keep his people. I gave him both. On the way back to the airport, I sat in the back of a rideshare and texted Maya. We just bought our brains a bicycle. She replied with a jelly bean emoji and the words, do not crash. Sometimes, when you are climbing, you do not notice the cliff until your toes curl over it. A winter storm hit the Midwest. Freeways went quiet. A new version of our alerting system, released on a Thursday night because courage often gets confused with impatience, began to send false positives from trucks that were safely parked. Red lights blinked on dashboards across 3 time zones. Drivers woke up in cabs and cursed us. Dispatchers called, voices tight. Do we move? Do we roll? Are we failing? We did not sleep. We traced the bug to a time sync issue that had looked harmless in a lab. There is a particular shame that comes when your tool, the thing you bragged about, becomes a hammer looking for your own thumb. We fixed it by dawn and spent the next week calling every angry person to tell them we were more sorry than our press release could afford to be. I remember the first time someone wrote the word billionaire next to my name. The article did not smell like truth. It smelled like cologne and newsprint and the inside of other people's expectations. My mother called and asked if she could finally quit one of her jobs. Not yet, Ma, I said. Soon. I think about that word sometimes like a dentist thinks about sugar. It is everywhere and not the point. The point was always promises, cold and time, and the small honest button that says acknowledge. We went public on an afternoon that sparkled. Olivia and I stood in a room where screens show numbers like weather. I shook so hard I tucked my hands in my pockets and pretended it was a style choice. Marcus texted me a photo of our college kitchen table with a new burn mark and wrote, "For luck." I caught my reflection in the glass and remembered Sophie's late laugh. A bell rang, and confetti did not fall because that would have been too sincere for the market. After the speeches, Grace leaned in and said, "Now it gets real." I wanted to argue that it had always been real. Instead, I said, "Right." The lawsuit arrived like a thunderclap on a clear day. A competitor claimed we had used their proprietary method to smooth jitter and censor data. The thing about smoothing is that everyone uses it, the way everyone uses salt. But patents can be cliffs hidden in fog. We gathered in the war room, which is an unfortunate but accurate name for a place where pizza boxes lean toward whiteboards. Julia drew timelines in dry erase elegance. "We did not do this," she said. "We can show that." For months I wore suits and answered questions with the warmth of a courtroom bench. The strangest part was the stillness in my chest. Fear sat there like a coin I refused to flip. After, when the judge dismissed most of the claims and a settlement washed the rest away, I went home and stood in my shower until the hot water cooled. The tile smelled like lemon cleaner and steam. I slept a long sleep that scared me with its depth. There were other women. A photographer named Claire who believed every ruination deserves a portrait and who taught me to see freight yards at dawn as cathedrals. A software engineer named Priya who solved problems with a humming sound that anyone else would have been embarrassed to make. A bartender named Lucy who majored in history, quoted Ida Tarbell, and told me monopolies are just long stories with short endings. None of them tried to rescue me from my work. They joined it for a while, then stepped off at their station. I kept moving. Not because I am noble, because I am bent that way. Here is a fact that shocked me when I learned it. A refrigerated trailer uses more fuel to maintain temperature than you would expect, and the most efficient practice is to cool the cargo before loading, what they call pre-cooling, because cold is a habit, and habits set early. Another, some lithium batteries can reignite hours after being doused, a lesson fire chiefs learned the hard way, and then taught to people like me who wanted to put sensors in everything that breeds data. We started a battery recycling initiative with a partner in Nevada because I could not bear the idea that our miracle devices would retire into a field somewhere like old dreams. The plant smelled like ozone and hot rubber, and the workers wore smiles behind masks that you recognize only by the eyes. When the pandemic came, our software, which had been a tool for efficiency, turned into something like a civic duty. We prioritized vaccine shipments, built dashboards for state agencies, and learned to speak in acronyms over video calls where everyone looked like they were beamed in from a quieter planet. I watched drivers on grainy screens lift their chin and promise to deliver. If you want a picture of courage in America, find a truck stop at 3 in the morning and look for the eyes that do not blink when the snow begins. Maya ran logistics with a patience that belongs in museums. She kept the jelly beans. She kept us moving. The night I told Grace to ground the fleet, I knew what we were risking. Inventory would spoil. Franchises would yell. The market would shake its head like a disappointed uncle. What I did not know was that the anomaly came from a hardware supplier swapping a sensor component after a shortage and not telling us. A rounding error with a soul. The next day, I walked through our warehouse, nodding to people whose names lived in my phone more than in my mouth. The pallets stared back, wrapped and silent. I pressed my hand to a plastic shroud and felt the cold try to climb into my skin. Trevor appeared at my shoulder. "We will get killed," he said. His voice carried that salesman's blend of love and dread. "Maybe," I said, "but we will tell the truth as it kills us." He looked at me and exhaled, slow. We held a press call. Journalists asked whether this was an overreaction, a stunt for attention, a prelude to bad earnings. I said, "We do not take risks with medicine. We do not take risks with food. If we are wrong, we will apologize for being careful." After the call, my mother texted a heart and the words, in Spanish, "Of course you did." I sat down and felt 80 years old and 12 years old at the same time. A week later, after we had swapped the faulty parts and pushed a firmware update that checked every assumption twice, a letter arrived from a small hospital in New Mexico. Their pharmacy director, a woman named Dr. Alvarez, wrote that our pause prevented them from administering a compromised lot. "We did not lose a single dose," she said. "We did not lose a single day." I put the letter in the rain jar in my head. When Olivia asked me to forward it to the board, I said I wanted to keep it private for a while. She let me. We built again, this time slower where speed had previously won the argument by showing up early. I learned to love the long meeting that ends in a small decision that will prevent a headline next winter. I also learned to go home before midnight when I could. I bought a little house with a porch and no gate. On Sundays, I walked to a bakery where the owner, Mr. Kim, put extra sesame on my bagel and suddenly knew things about our delivery network that I had not told him. "People talk," he said, smiling like a streetlight. A child dropped a pastry and cried at a pitch that made strangers giggle. I stood there and felt the rare privilege of being an unimportant person for 9 minutes. On a work trip to Savannah, I met a woman named Naomi who ran a small logistics firm that dealt in seafood, which is to say in trust. We took a ferry ride after meetings and watched the river push against itself. "I like your company because it admits it is wrong sometimes," she said. "Machines do not apologize." We dated for a while, sharing calendars like weather forecasts. When it ended, we cried gently, then ordered tacos and toasted to fairness. I do not know if that counts as maturity. It felt like honesty with training wheels. Meanwhile, Harbolite turned into an ecosystem, which is what companies call it when the product pieces begin to talk to each other without the founder translating. We launched a thing that made drivers' phones speak in a friendlier voice when a route shifted late at night. We created a dashboard mode with fewer colors for night shift eyes. Priya shipped an algorithm that noticed when a door seal was almost tired, not yet broken, and recommended a replacement the way your favorite mechanic suggests new wipers before a storm. We were not brilliant. We were careful in a way that felt like love. There is a museum in Kansas City dedicated to jazz where the guide explains how a rhythm section listens harder than anyone else on stage. I stood there one afternoon with Claire, who was shooting a series about American work, and I felt a chord click inside me. That is leadership. Not the solo, the listening. Later, in a hotel lobby that smelled like citrus and new carpet, Claire showed me a photograph of a long-haul driver resting his forehead against the steering wheel, a quiet hour before dawn. "His name is Lionel," she said. "He says he likes the sound of refrigerated trailers because it reminds him there is something worth keeping cold." We both laughed at how sentimental that sounded and did not argue with its truth. Regulators came, because they should. We answered questions on data sovereignty and labor impact and environmental trade-offs with more humility than our earlier selves could have afforded. A senator asked if we could guarantee equitable distribution when crises hit. I said guarantees are for brochures, commitments are for people. "So commit," she said, not unkindly. We signed a memorandum to prioritize rural clinics during emergencies, because fairness without rules is a rumor. In the middle of what I thought would be the quiet year after the loud ones, my father died with the radio on and a crossword half filled, the pen uncapped. I flew home and walked into a house that kept its temperature like it knew the settings by heart. Grief is not a story. It is a room where time forgets to pass. After the funeral, my mother and I sat at the kitchen table and sorted through the rain jar, which we had not touched in years. We found train tickets, movie stubs, a ring pop wrapper from when I was too small to hold a secret. She put her hand on mine and said, "You built something he would have liked to fix." I said I would trade all of it for one more rattle of his pockets. She said she knew. I began to mentor founders the way strangers had mentored me, on benches, in coffee lines, with sentences that try not to pretend they are maps. I told a 20-something with eyes like bright storms that raising money is not a personality trait. I told a burned-out 30-something that if your work eats your joy, starve the work for a week so your joy remembers how to chew. Not genius, just field notes from a longer walk. When the second big crisis arrived, it wore a quieter coat. A defect in a third-party routing library caused deliveries to cluster on a handful of warehouse doors during a holiday week, creating wait times that felt like small eternities. It was not our code, but it was our responsibility. I drove to the site at dawn. Breath puffed in the cold. Forklifts beeped in a minor key. I walked the dock like a priest without a sermon, listening for the note that would tell me where the knot had formed. An older supervisor named Hank lifted his chin at me. "You are the guy," he said. "Today I am a guy," I answered. We pulled people from offices to throw on safety vests and direct traffic like air marshals. By noon, the knot loosened. When we finally traced the bug and patched the chain, I sent a message to the whole company that used the word sorry the way some people avoid it. Then I went outside, leaned against a wall that smelled of diesel and cold, and let the sun find my face. 3 more factoids, because I have earned the right to share the ones I like. First, the banana you eat probably traveled farther than most people travel in a year, and the curve in a banana comes from the fruit's stubborn reach for sunlight as it grows. Second, the phrase "just in time," which sounds like a miracle, began as a simple observation on factory floors in Japan that waste lives in the space between when you need a thing and when it arrives. Third, the average intermodal train in this country can carry the equivalent of hundreds of trucks, and one of the quiet gifts of our era is that many of those trains now whisper rather than shout when they break, because engineers changed the metallurgy of the wheels. None of this will make you a better person. It will make you look at the world with kinder eyes. The company kept growing in that awkward adolescent way, tripping over its own feet, apologizing, then running again. On a Tuesday that smelled of rain and marker ink, Julia knocked on my door and sat without waiting. "I am leaving," she said, and smiled before my face could fall. "I want to build something from zero again." We hugged like siblings. After she left, I stood and looked at the whiteboard. It held ideas like a sky holds birds. I erased a corner slowly, as if gentleness mattered to dry erase ink. I still get coffee with Sophie's memory sometimes. In a quiet kitchen at dawn, I hear her late laugh when I say something that pretends to be brave. I see Naomi leaning on a ferry railing, eyes narrowed against a wind that wants to change the subject. I remember Claire asking Lionel for permission before taking the shot, and then showing him the back of the camera like a gift. The women in my life did not push me toward some shimmering peak. They kept me honest about where my feet were. That is rarer than ambition. That is gold you cannot deposit. Do not let the calm tone fool you. There were nights when I wanted to walk into the river of traffic and let it carry me somewhere nobody knows my name. There were mornings when the silence before the first email felt like a held note, and I did not want to breathe because I liked the possibility that nothing was wrong yet. And yet, I always came back to the quiet truth that work, when you choose it, can be a form of affection for strangers. You build so someone you will never meet does not have to worry about whether the thing they need will be there when they need it. When the city honored us with an award that came with a glass sculpture shaped like nobody's idea of beauty, I stood at a podium in a room full of polite forks and told a story about strawberries and a driver named Carlos who taught me that speed without care is just noise. After, a young woman in a faded denim jacket approached me and said she had joined the company because of a blog post I barely remembered writing. "You wrote that failure is just data you paid for," she said. I wrote that on a napkin and kept it. I shook her hand and tried not to make a speech about how she would teach me more than I would teach her. On the way home, I put the glass sculpture on the passenger seat and buckled it out of superstition. And now we are back in the room where this began, the one with the glass that shows you yourself when you most want to look away. The phones are quiet for the moment. Grace has leaned the folder against the edge of the table, the way a person stacks dishes near the sink before washing. Outside, the rain has slowed to a whisper. Inside, I hear the faraway compressor in the building's belly and picture 1,000 other compressors holding the line in warehouses and grocers and clinics, each a pulse in a country that does not know how to rest, but knows how to keep its promises most of the time. I stand, slide the tie back around my neck, and let my fingers remember the knot. In another minute, I will open the door and walk the hallway like a person who belongs to it. Before I do, I breathe, slow and even, and imagine my father's pockets full of change, the rattle that means you can still move. I do not pretend to be wiser than the next stubborn builder. The truth is calmer and less cinematic. I have learned to sit in the middle of the noise and listen for the softest sound, the one that tells you where the promise is thin. You go there. You fix it. You make a note. You apologize if you must. You go home. You come back. Somewhere, a driver pulls his cap lower against the dawn. Somewhere, a pharmacist flips a sign from closed to open and trusts the truck will arrive while the coffee is still warm. Somewhere, a mother shows her kid the rain jar and tells a story about saving for weather you cannot see on the forecast. And somewhere in a quiet office, a man who is still a boy sometimes stands at a window and watches the city lights run like code he almost understands, and forgives himself for not solving it all today. Tomorrow is another route. Tomorrow the machines will hum, and the people will look at one another and say the words that build a world. We are here. We are ready. Let us begin.